Well, hello. Thank you for joining us. This is something new we're doing today. This is the first in a series of conversations for change. My name's Johnny. I'm the pastor of Liberty Church London, and in recent weeks, a lot has emerged around the topic of racism, injustice, and compassion. And it's something which we really want to dig a little bit deeper into. So my plan is to have a series of conversations with friends about the subject of racism, and specifically racism in the UK. We've been heartbroken by the events in the US, most recently with the death of George Floyd on the 25th of May, but many events in the US over the years, and it's heartbreaking and painful to see. We also really want to address the topic of racism in the UK. In London is where we are as a church, so London specifically, but in the UK, it's something we need to continue to think about. So I'm really excited to have a friend of mine joining us today, Pastor Wayne Brown from Life Church in Northwest London.
Hi guys, great to be here. Thanks Johnny, thanks for the invite.
It's great to have you with us, and we're just going to have the idea is, as I said, it's a conversation. And Wayne, I've asked to do this because every time I talk to you, Wayne, I feel like I grow as a person. I feel challenged and inspired, and I just appreciate you so much.
Well, it's mutual, man. It's mutual. And I think I was blown away with how you approached your church plant. And I know there's different models for doing it, but, you know, behind the person was, or rather behind the Instagram post was a person. How you said, this is Johnny, this is not a robot, you know, what do you want to know? Do you want to do a coffee? And literally I was just blown away. Just, you know, it's fantastic. So I think, yeah, there's a kinship there that goes beyond our individual experiences. And obviously it's rooted in, you know, the whole love of God and the body of Christ. So yeah, you're every bit my brother.
Yes. See, if nothing else, we're going to have a bromance, and that's what's going to happen.
Absolutely, here. Man. Come on.
Well, one of the things, so we're part of a global family of churches. One of the things that our lead pastor, Paul Andrews, says is these sort of conversations, we're recording them, but they're not like, if no one else watches this,
yeah,
I want to grow. Like, I personally want to learn some things. I want to improve as a man, as a church pastor, as a white man living in London. I want to improve and move things forward. So if nothing else, if I learn from this, that's a win for me.
I think you're right. And I think, you know, some conversation that we've had, it's a difficult question sometimes. It's a difficult conversation. And believe it or not, it's a difficult conversation for me to have. I don't know, perhaps throughout the conversation we'll get into it, but there's a double consciousness sometimes that I have as a black guy to say, well, if I have this, am I rocking the boat? Am I shaking things up? Have this conversation. And I think, you know, we both kind of agreed in our conversations that as long as we're honest and open, we may get it wrong. You know, I may make assumptions that aren't true, and you may say things that, you know, don't come out exactly how you mean it. But actually, the heart of the matter, the spirit of the matter is, you know, we're here to learn. We're here to learn from each other, and we're here to grow. So, yeah, I'm just happy to do it, man. I really commend you just for even having the conversation. You know. And it's one that's, in a sense, reaching out as opposed to just doing it internally. So, yeah, more power, Johnny. Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned conversation and how we will learn from one another, and how conversation isn't perfect. This isn't scripted. We're not reading a statement. It's meant to be a chat, a two-way thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, as a Christian, I believe that prayer is the most powerful weapon we have, most powerful tool we have to transform situations.
Yeah.
But I think in the natural, conversations are just a fantastically powerful tool to help us rethink about things. So
yeah, you're right. Absolutely right.
So I'm not trying to be an interviewer, but I've got a few questions I thought which would help stimulate our conversations. The first thing I'd like you to do, question is who is Wayne Brown? Just tell us a little bit about who you are. Like, doesn't have to be an existential thing.
Yeah. Well, no. So me, you know what? I'm a joker at heart. If I'm honest with you, I'm just a regular guy, a joker at heart. I was born in 1977, which, if you can do maths better than me, works out to about 43 this year. got a wonderful wife who partners with me in ministry and in life and in some other business sort of exploits. 2 kids that are grown up faster than anything I've seen. One is 13 now, and the other one is 10. 2 girls, Mia Gabrielle and Annalise Louise, and they are my wife and my girls. They're just the center of my life. A pastor, North West London. We started a church about 5 years ago, and to be honest with you, one of the reasons we started the church was to not to break traditions, but to understand what bits of my traditional Pentecostal upbringing I needed to keep, and what bits I need to perhaps let go. So we say we want to have church without trappings, basically. So life is our church. Life's an anagram for a number of things: live in faith every day, live in faith effortlessly, and let insecurities find an exit. Love inspires, friendship encourages, lost in the Father's embrace. All of these are anagrams for how we run our church life.
I love that. That's so good. Those anagrams are amazing. It'd take too long we'd have too long anagrams for liberty.
Oh yeah. Well,
Life.
Let me know, man. I can get started on something.
That's so good. That's so good. And I've had the privilege of going to your church. It was just such a beautiful community of people, and it was such a privilege to be with you guys. It was about a year ago that now. Time flies.
Yeah, absolutely.
You didn't mention your football team.
No, I deliberately skipped over that, Johnny. But there is only one team in North London. So even though the church is in Northwest, I'm North London in a sense, born and raised. Well, not born and raised. I was actually born in Southeast London, but I lived the majority of my years in North London, and the team I support is Arsenal.
It's Arsenal. Wow.
I've said it.
Great. Well, now we've got the important stuff out the way, like football team.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is Conversation for Change, and our focus is racism, injustice, and compassion. And I'd love you to share your thoughts on what's happened since really it was kind of catalyzed by the death of George Floyd on May 25th. But I think I don't think it was an instant thing. I think it's been a long time coming. There's been a sort of uprising and protests in the United States and in the UK. And I'd love you to share your thoughts around that.
Yeah. Well, Johnny, I'll tell you what, I was up, late as you do. And I saw, I can't remember the exact day, whether it was Wednesday or Tuesday, I can't remember the exact day, but like I said, 25th of May, this thing happened. I saw it and literally I started crying. And my wife was sleeping, and the first thing I did when we woke up that morning, I said, "Have you seen this?" And she was in bits. And it's not that we haven't seen police brutality before in terms of violence against African Caribbean men or African Americans, but this one, for some reason, it triggered something in me. It triggered anger, it triggered frustration, it triggered all sorts of stuff. And in reflection, I put something on Instagram which tried to capture how I felt and how I the emotions that I had on that day. And it was a bit nuanced, because unlike 29 years earlier when Rodney King was captured being beat by those 4 cops in LA, unlike that, this one, I really felt that could have been me. Not literally, but George Floyd, roughly the same age. When Rodney King happened, I was a little boy. But this is a man who's roughly the same sort of age as me. Maybe had a similar lived experience with systemic racism, but the impunity that those police acted with, it just triggered me in a way that I've never been triggered by anything like that before. And I just thought, 29 years ago, and like I said, I'm not great at maths, but that puts me, it puts me at about, was it 12? I'm 43, so take away 20 is 23, and take away 9, I don't know, mate. I'm about 11 or something like that. I don't know.
Don't make me do maths. Don't put me under that pressure. I'm just sitting here listening and learning.
But when I thought about it, it's like 29 years and nothing's changed. And I put that post up on Insta, and I had to fight back. And I guess what we're seeing around the world is, a response to the emotions of it. Like I said, I had to fight back. I had to fight back those tears, even when I was posting on Insta. And it's one of those things I don't normally do. I don't normally comment on, on quote unquote black issues. I don't see myself as an activist for the cause. All the sort of stuff I've done, community organizing work, has been for mutual interest, for shared interest. But the racial issue, it's not that it hasn't ever been there. I've always known about it. I've lived with it. But for some reason, this one just triggered for me a desire to have, conversations and to actually say, no, this is wrong. And it has been wrong for a long time. And it's unfortunately a product of a system and a narrative that has, in a sense, marginalized and ostracized and vilified people of color. And that's a hard narrative to take, especially if you're not a person of color, because, oftentimes it's them and it's us, and it shouldn't be like that. But, there's so many layers to this thing that, I think we could have these conversations every day for a year and not really get to the bottom or get to, in a sense, the solution of how to actually bring about long-lasting systemic change.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we do need to keep having these conversations. You're right. I think it's very easy for things to slip into I'm with them, and there's a difference. So
Yeah.
I think it's a human nature to slip into that, to compartmentalize things.
You're right.
And so I think these conversations, having them, they may be uncomfortable, but having them regularly is what changes that and what uproots people out of their comfort zone of I am this, and these are my people, and this is where I am, and uproots us and makes us kind of see things differently.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
So obviously a lot of the things you're talking about then happened in the United States, and
Yeah.
it is like my heart grieves too. I can't believe the things have happened. I can't believe the things that people have had to live through and live with. I lived for the best part of a year in the US, and
Right.
it's hard to see. But I'd love to hear about your experiences here in the UK, in London,
Yeah.
as a black man living here, and how you feel, maybe what differences you may see or what similarities you may see. I think that'd be really helpful for me to understand.
Well, I think, in terms of similarities, so again, this thing has triggered something that's global. I think, black folk all over the world are feeling, that could have been my dad, my brother, it could have been me, in terms of how we feel, vicariously putting ourselves, in a sense, under the knee of that police officer. And so I think that does transfer, because it speaks to, in a sense, a lived experience that others may not have had. So I've often walked into shops, literally grown up in London. And I lived a part of my life in Northampton, which is even less multicultural, less cosmopolitan. But I remember I walked into shops on many occasions, even now, even recently, before this whole lockdown stuff happened. And, catch the eye of the security guard and think, well, hold a minute, why are you following me around Sainsbury's? I'm going down the aisle. Oh, he's at the top of the aisle. Okay, walk to the top of the aisle. He's at the bottom of the aisle. And it's crazy, because you think, is this just me? Am I going crazy? And then you do something like, okay, well, look, let me check if this guy's really following me. So you walk back and you walk forward, and every single aisle you go down, there's the security guard at the bottom or the top of the aisle. And this is not one occasion, this is several occasions. And you think, what is it? Am I, quote unquote, dressed in a certain way? Am I walking a certain way? what is it? And then that quote by, I think it's Arthur C. Doyle, who wrote, Sherlock Holmes, that when you eliminate all the impossibles or the improbables, then whatever remains, regardless of how unlikely or how improbable, that must be the truth. So when you take away and you strip away everything, then, it comes to, well, what is the common denominator? And unfortunately, it's my blackness. And you think, is this real? And then the other day, literally yesterday, there's a correlation between this whole thing about the perception of mental health as it relates to Black folk. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but if you look at how things are categorized in terms of the media, just yesterday or the day before on the Observer, front page of the Observer, the headline was about mental health issues and how kids and children will be affected by mental health. Next to that headline was a picture of a Black guy. And in small writing, it was, this guy wins the award-winning author, the award-winning BAFTA award-winning director, whatever it was. But the heading was so small that when you see mental health and you see a picture of a Black guy, then you equate the picture of the heading of mental health to this, but they had nothing to do with each other. And it was a post on Facebook, came from my feed. And when I looked at it, I said, the actual story that relates to this man on the front cover is on page 35 of the Observer magazine, newspaper rather. Nothing on the front page and nothing in the following 34 pages have anything to do with that picture on the front cover. And then you think, the guy that put it up, I mean, he was my brother, so I'm not making any sort of, connection to that. But he said in his post, he said, this is how racism or systemic racism works. Black folks will see this immediately. And it's amazing if you look at the thread, it's just, yeah, wow, we get it straight away. Obviously his white friends were like, what is it? Help me, what am I supposed to be seeing here? But it's that indirect narrative, it's the correlation, it's the stuff that is unspoken that creates a picture and a narrative that means that when I leave my front door, I'm in a sense walking in, the Bible says the double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, right? But there is a duality of consciousness that I think sometimes, do I need to put someone else at ease by crossing the road in order to make them feel more comfortable to walk on the same road as me?
Wow.
Now, that is something that, I don't know, Johnny, whether you've ever experienced that. I mean, maybe if there's a young lady walking in front of you and you're coming out of the tube at night, maybe you might think, I don't want to make her feel uncomfortable. I'll cross the road. But for me,
I think that makes sense. That it's something you'd do in that situation, like come out of the tube at night, there's someone feeling vulnerable, but it's not, I think it's conscious politeness rather than a conscious way of living. Like, this is how I have to live my life.
And I think that's conscious politeness is a great way of putting it. For myself, even though I might think it's conscious politeness, unfortunately, that consciousness is also rooted in, there's a Black man walking behind a lady. I don't want her to feel like this Black man is a potential threat. And that unconscious bias is not unconscious bias. Sorry, that's a whole nother thing, mate. That double consciousness of the Black mind, as it were, is something that definitely in my peer group we've spoken about it. We've spoken about it in our church networks. There's folk that have it, and it's really interesting because from a white perspective, it's conscious politeness. From a Black perspective, it's a consciousness that says, I don't want to be perceived as a threat.
Wow. Wow.
And so it's really interesting. And again, you've helped me because I've got a new way of looking at this. Growing up, I was the only Black kid in my class. I was maybe one of 7 Black kids in the school at the time. And the conscious thing or the unconscious thing is to assimilate, is to want to be like and try and be like. And, my folks drummed it into me that, when you leave school, you have to work twice as hard, because there is a system that is set up that caters for its kind. And that is not pejorative, but it's true. And if we look, sometimes we are easily gravitated towards our kind. So if the economic power, if the political systems, if the socio-economic systems of the time are being, in a sense, not controlled, I don't mean it in a bad way, but are being run, governed, and authored by white Caucasian males, then the system will follow after its kind. It will protect its kind. It will grow in its kind. And I guess sometimes church like that, that we will try and reach out to all kinds, but sometimes, and most of the time, people of our kind, quote unquote, gravitate towards us. And I may be going off on a tangent, but that's something we try to do actively. In fact, I was having this conversation with my wife last night. I don't know if you heard about the church whose pastors have resigned. They went out on a quote unquote campaign to attract white folks to their church. And we were saying, me and my wife were talking about that. If we did that, it wouldn't be perceived as racist. And I guess the difference is there that we, as a majority Black church, trying to go after a minority group, that whatever we did to try and attract them wouldn't be perceived as racist. But as a white leader trying to go, or as a Black leader trying to get more Black folks because my church is too white, then that would be, there's a bit of a power thing here. There's a bit of a prejudice here. There's a bit of a bias here that I'm leaning towards. So, even in our churches, we get it wrong, mate, and I think it's these conversations help,
Absolutely.
Sorry, man, I'm rambling on like.
Not at all. And I think you're right. Absolutely. Well, I mean, straight away, I think I need to say churches do get it wrong. We have got it wrong a lot. I think, I think if churches were getting it right, we would have been in a different place right now. But churches have got racism wrong, have approached race poorly. I'm not saying any church in particular, but I just think the church in general, maybe in the West, has really struggled I think they found it uncomfortable to talk about race, so have just left it. And when you don't deal with an issue, if you don't deal with something, any subject, any topic, you can't progress in it, you can't move forward in it, you can't. It'll forever be uncomfortable. In fact, the longer you leave something, the more uncomfortable it gets.
That's right. The more uncomfortable it gets, you're right.
And so I think that's why we're in a situation now where we're having to have conversations which many people will find uncomfortable. But if we'd had them years ago, they would have been possibly uncomfortable then, but maybe less uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
No, I think you're right, and I think we have to change the narrative as well. And that's the wider meta narrative, the macro sort of conversation, but also these conversations that speak to, relationships. Because, I think if it was just simply a Black and white issue, then we wouldn't be talking, Johnny. Do you know what I mean? We wouldn't be friends. We wouldn't have any sort of conversation. And I think these things become systemic. I've had friends, unfortunately, that have been blocked from different churches, websites, for asking questions. Because the questions may have been too inflammatory, in the church's eyes. But this again is all an idea of, do we whitewash hard questions, or do we actually say, look, there may be some validity here, and I know the brand needs to be protected, but let's have the conversation. And so if we're always, in a sense, on crisis management, brand protection alert, then we're never going to have those conversations, And these are not small churches; these are massive, major, global, white-led churches that seem to be managing their brands so effectively that it's only the good stuff we're hearing. And, it takes someone who's got a bit of nous with the computer to say, look, these are my posts and these were the responses, and now I've been blocked, and now, and all sort of stuff. And they're not bad questions. They're conversations that just need to be had,
Absolutely, yeah. You touched on something about the systemic
Yeah.
racism.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more about what systemic racism means and what
Right.
that looks like in the UK as well? And
Okay.
and maybe some thoughts of like, how do we move away from that?
Right. So if we look at language, for example, so language plays a great part in this. When we were growing up in school, we probably did this thing called the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. Now, recently, my daughter came home. Well, not came home. She downloaded an assignment, in COVID, whatever it is. She had an assignment that was to do with the transatlantic slave trade. Now, I said to her, here's the problem with systemic racism. That when you say transatlantic slave trade, you immediately dehumanize people into cargo.
Wow.
If we're being really honest about what happened, we have to say the transatlantic trade of enslavement, which is different to a slave trade. Slave trade is just, whatever. But when you go further and say, well, actually, it's the transatlantic trade of enslaved Africans, then the narrative changes, because, to say that and to deliver that in a class lesson means that what you're saying to your pupils is that you're telling your pupils that those that we now call quote unquote slaves were once free human beings minding, in a sense, their own business, but due to greed and due to quote unquote the demand for cheap labor, those free Africans, those free sovereign human beings, were enslaved and then were traded throughout the world. That's a whole different conversation. And so when we talk about systemic racism, we've got to understand that it's partly to do with our language. And then if we are really honest, Black history, African history doesn't start with enslavement. So I recently did a DNA test, Johnny, and I found out that my heritage lies in the Benin Kingdom. So the Benin Kingdom is a part of West Africa, a little bit below Nigeria, and it was a massive empire. And I did some research and found out that the British Army went in and absolutely ransacked the Benin Kingdom. They took everything. And right now in the British Museum, there are artifacts from the Benin Kingdom, bronze carvings, bronze moldings, hallmarks. And the assertion was, there's no way that these quote unquote primitive people could have actually done these types of ornate bronze works, brass works, gold works, silver works, etc., because they were uneducated and uncivilized. Now, the truth is that those artifacts don't belong, quote unquote, in a British museum, but again, systemic racism says, okay, they're ours now. Systemic racism is, you go down to the British Library and just go into the British Library. I think you turn left and you go into the part of the library where you can see some of the old Bibles, and look in the Bibles and you see these Ethiopian Bibles that are from, I think it's like the 13th or 12th century. And you think, wow, these icons in the Ethiopian Bibles are actually pictured in black. So, Jesus is black, he's colored black, he's painted black. And these icons, and you think, well, actually, where do they get these Bibles from? Well, clues in the word, they're Ethiopian. And then you go back to the Bible and say, well, didn't Philip baptize an Ethiopian eunuch? And this Ethiopian eunuch took the gospel that had been explained to him by this Middle Eastern Jewish guy, quote unquote Jewish Christian now, took the Bible and took the gospel back to Ethiopia. And so Black history and Black Christianity predates enslavement, but systemic racism, in a sense, doesn't allow that story to be told. And then if you move it forward, there's a great, I can't remember the name of the lady, but if you Google brown eyes, blue eyes experiment, I forget, I think her name's Helen something. She did a fantastic experiment about prejudice just based on colors, the color of people's eyes. Or, look at the white doll, brown doll experiment. That again highlights how, racism is systemic. And I had a conversation with a couple of folk the other day online, and Dawn Edge, she's the, I think she's the lead in Manchester University for Mental Health and Inclusion. And she cited that the British Board of Psychiatry, they've actually noted that psychiatric practices are systemically racist, which means if I go to see a psychiatric nurse and give her the explanation of, the guy following me around in Sainsbury's, she writes up in my notes, he has delusions of being followed. But actually it's a lived experience. And so the whole thing about systemic racism, it's so entrenched within the narrative of our culture that, again, when we come to church, and I mentioned it mistakenly earlier, unconscious bias, it sets up something that, white folk may have and not even know they have it. Black folk live under it and sometimes don't even know we're under it, even though we feel it and we experience it. It's systemic, which means that it's ingrained into the systems, the politics, the financial practices, into our social and our economic abilities. It's everywhere. Sorry, man, I think that's a bit long-winded, but how do we get out of it? How do we change it? We've got to change the narrative. We've got to start telling the stories. We've got to have the uncomfortable conversations, and we've got to say that actually, Black identity needs to be, in a sense, rerouted back into our culture, and there needs to be the freedom and the liberty and the space to actually express it without being perceived as an other. Yeah.
This is really helpful. This is really, really helpful stuff. It is, and it's very uncomfortable to hear.
Yeah.
But it's true, isn't it? As long as it's always in the system and it's unconscious and unspoken, but it's there, it's culture. Yeah. It's never going to go away. When you're planting a church, one of the lessons I was taught is that culture eats vision for breakfast. And this was about planting a church, starting a church. Culture eats vision for breakfast, because you can say, we're going to do this, we're going to go here, this is our vision. But the reality of what a culture is culture is the things that people do without having to be instructed.
Yeah.
So if you've got a culture that is not going the way that your vision's going, your culture is going to win. Right. But that's helpful for church planting. But for this situation, for a nation, if you've got a culture that says, without saying it out loud, without telling anybody, but this is just how it is, that some people are worth less. Some people are more likely to steal something. Some people are more like, if you keep having a narrative, it's going to affect how you behave.
Yeah.
So I guess my big question is, and I'm not expecting you to solve it now, but it's like, as a white person, I want to know, at a white husband and a white father to two white children, how do we see this change? How do we see this system change? And maybe specifically as, I'm very passionate about the church, being a church leader, and we've talked about churches a few times already. How do we see that how can it be something that doesn't exist in the church and society?
Well, I think that's a big one, Johnny. And I think we've got to be deliberate. We have to be deliberate. I mean, I came out of a church that within our ecosystem, as the church ecosystem in the UK, was Black majority. Me and my wife went to the General Assembly the first time I took her to a General Assembly in the US, because the church is actually affiliated to a wider body, global body called the Church of God. So I came out of the church called New Testament Church of God, which is that's the title in the UK. In America, it's the Church of God. Now, the ecosystem in the UK, as I said, was black majority. The system in America is white majority. And so we stepped out of a ecosystem where we thought we were comfortable. And then to realize that we, in a sense, were not just the, I think they say majority ethnic, but, you know, we were the minority ethnic, as it were, in this conference. And it really started to ask, you know, make us ask ourselves questions that unless we have a frank conversation, unless we're talking about it, unless we are being deliberate in these conversations and saying, look, you know, as a church, if your quote unquote leadership is 98.9 or 99.8% white, then what happens is if you then have a majority of the congregation that is black, and your leadership doesn't reflect the black or even the multiple ethnicities in your church, then there's something wrong there. Because in order to be informed, you have to be surrounded by those that can inform you. You know, and there is, again, there's something, and we have to do this. This may be something that a conversation for the quote unquote black community, not that I like to say that in this type of conversation, but we also have to do a piece of work that says, actually, if we are attending white-led churches, then are we influencing how those churches speak to our needs? And if we aren't, then we've got to point the finger at ourselves and say, well, what are we doing? And so I think there's got to be from a leadership perspective, space for those conversations to happen. There's got to be a clear route and progression, as it were, for leadership on all from all sorts of backgrounds. I heard one church leader on a live the other day say that they found it notoriously hard to put people of color in leadership positions. And I just had to scratch my head and say, well, you know, what is notoriously hard about it if your church is majority black, or majority ethnic? If in that context, white leadership is the minority of the entire church, then what's the struggle with finding at least a couple folk to put into leadership? I don't know. But these conversations, they need to be had, man. They need to be open, they need to be frank, and they need to be honest, you know. And I think, you know, John, even in our private conversations, the one thing I appreciate is that you allow me to be honest, and, you know, and I allow you to be honest. And if we both make mistakes, then, you know, we go away and we learn from it. And I think that needs to be the platform that we have these conversations from, you know.
That's really helpful. That's really great. It's I'm not under the impression at all that having a few conversations like this is going to actually fix years of systemic racism. And
that's true.
But I think we can move forward. I really hope we can. I am learning a lot, as I said at the beginning. Like if no one watches this video, at least I'm learning, and that's what matters to me. I want to learn. I want to grow.
Right.
And my hope and my prayer for for my church, but for my family, for my children, is they will grow up different and seeing things differently, and the culture which has existed for a long time will start to be changed, and the change will be in them and in our family and hopefully in our church. And I'm hoping and believing that now at this time in history, it's a key moment, a kairos moment where things I think we're at one of those points where things will either change for the better or they'll get more entrenched for the worse. And so and I think we could easily, as a nation, double down and go, no, this is how things are. We don't want to upset the status quo and really suppress this conversation and suppress the feelings of many people and the experiences many people had, and just say, no, we're going to ignore it. This is how we are. Or we can go the other way, go, okay, well, this is uncomfortable, but we're willing to embrace that and have some conversations and make some changes and hopefully see a transformed society.
I think you're right, and I think that's the goal. We've just got to keep pushing, you know, keep pushing through it, get through the uncomfortable conversations. You know, even if you look, you know, biblically, the whole idea of salvation comes out of excruciating pain that leads to death. And I think that anything that is worth fighting for, like this cause, you know, this whole idea of racial, and I think the word I like to use at the moment, John, is equity as opposed to equality. You know, this whole fight for racial equity is one that is going to go through pain, you know. But, you know, Christ went through it so that we could live. So, you know, let's go through a little bit of pain. Let's go through a little bit of discomfort. But after it, you know, we'll come out and, you know, we'll be better for it, definitely.
Such great words, such great wisdom. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna pass that off as a Johnny Pepin original. It's really good.
Right, man. you have, apparently there's this rule, there's the Baptist rule.
Oh yeah, what's the Baptist rule?
The Baptist rule, apparently this is the American Baptist rule. I was with a preacher from the States and he said, listen, anytime you want to quote something, the Baptist rule is the first time you say, you know, I heard Johnny say, and then you say what Johnny said. The second time you say, I heard a good friend of mine say, and then you say, obviously, what Johnny said. But by the third time, it's, well, like I always say.
That's so good. That's so good. Oh, man. I love that. Well, we seem to have
up there.
I froze. I think it was my
up for a little bit, mate. The smile is wonderful.
You're on my computer. You're frozen.
Was it me or was it you?
I don't know. I think it's me. I think it's me. You were frozen, but you're unfrozen now. There we go. Right. One of us was frozen, and we will only find out when we watch this back who it was, or whether it was us both. Thank you so much for your time, friend. I really appreciate you.
No problem, man. No problem.
And yeah, let's keep talking. We're buddies. Yeah. I'm a Liverpool fan, and Liverpool were about to win the Premier League. You're an Arsenal fan, so we need to talk about that at some point.
Yes, at some point. I want to say that COVID helped you, but I'll just be pulling at straws, mate. It's been a good season for you, man.
It's been a great season. Yeah, it's been a good season for a Scouser.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to close, would you mind praying for us?
And yeah, not at all. Not at all. Father, we thank you for your goodness, your mercy, your love, and your grace. That grace that doesn't hold account of our wrongs, but actually frees us to live in the liberty that you have provided for us. That grace, Father God, that takes us out of the bondage that brings death and brings us to a place of life, but life more abundantly. And today we just want to ask you for your grace to be revealed in a world that perhaps hasn't seen your grace in action. We pray, God, that your grace will be revealed in our churches, where sometimes our systems and our processes have become the main thing. We pray, God, that your grace will be revealed in the lives of every single believer, that we wouldn't walk under the condemnation of our past, but we walk in the purpose of our destiny. God, we bless you. We love you, Lord, and we give you all the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen.